Harry Potter. First book, Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, the number 4 Privet Drive, were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you would accept to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just did not hold with such a nonsense. Mr. Dursley was a director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blondy and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over the garden's fence, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there are no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They did not think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was the Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they had not met for several years. In fact, Mr. Dursley pretended she did not have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as undursleyous as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never even seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They did not want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring toy for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled and screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large 20 oval flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dudley picked up his briefcase, picked Mr. Dudley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the wall. Little Tacky shouted by Mr. Dursley as he laughed by the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4 Drive. It was on the corner of the estate that he noticed the sign of something peculiar, a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley did not realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there was not a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the lights. Mr. Dudley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As the Mrs. Dudley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. Now, looking at sign, cat could not read maps or signs. Mr. Dudley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards the town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of the town, drills were driving out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he could not help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of stagily dressed people about. People in clocks. Mr. Rusty could not bear the people who dress in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw on young people, he supposed. This was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on the huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Darcy was enraged to see that a couple of them were not young at all. Why that man had to be older than he and wearing an emerald green clock. The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Darcy that this was probably some silly stunt these people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings car park, his mind back on drill. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he had not, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drill that morning. He did not see the owls swiping past in the broad daylight, though the people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl speeded over the hat. Most of them had never seen an owl even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at the 5 different pupils, he made several important telephone calls, and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he would stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from a baker opposite. He forgot all about the people in clocks until he passed a group of them next to the breakers. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He did not know why, but they made him uneasy. This a lot were whispering excitedly, too, and he could not see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large dog cart in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters. That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped that. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his phone number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter was not such an unusual name. He was sure there were a lot of people called Potters who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he was not even sure his nephew was called Harry. He would never even seen the boy. It might have been a Harvey or a Harlot. There was no point in worrying Mr. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he would had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in class. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on the drill that afternoon, and when he left the building at the 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. "Sorry," he grunted as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Duzzy realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He did not seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile. He said in a squeaky voice that made passers-by stare, "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoices, for you know who has gone at last? Even Muggle like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a Muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things which he had never hoped before, because he did not approve the imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of the number 4, the first thing he saw, and it did not improve his mood, was the tabby cat he was spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same marking around its eye. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dudley loudly. The cat did not move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dudley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dudley had a nice normal day. She told him over the dinner all about the Mrs. Next Door's problem with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word. "Shut." Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been pulled to the bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, the bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although the owls normally hunt at night and hardly ever seen in the daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping patterns. The newsreader allowed himself a grin. "Most mysterious, and now over a gin McFin with the weather. Going to be any more shower of the owl tonight, Tim?" "Well, Ted," said the weatherman, "I don't know about that, but it's not only the owl that have been acting oddly today. We were as far apart of Cairns. Yorkshire and the Dundees have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, there had been a downpour of the shooting star. Perhaps people have been celebrating the bonfire night early. It's not until next week, Fox, but I can promise a wet night tonight." Mr. Dursley sat frozen in the armchair. Shooting starred all over the Britain, owl flying by the daylight, mysterious people sons in the claws all over the place, and a whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He would have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. "Petunia," Dear, you have not heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Darcy looked shocked and angry after all they normally pretended she did not have a sister. No, she said sharply. Why? Finally, stuff on the news. Mr. Darcy mumps. Oval shooting star, and there were a lot of funny people looking people in a town today. So, snapped Mr. Sistersley. Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her a lot. Mrs. Ali sipped her tea through the process, and Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared to tell he would hear the name Potter. He decided to not dare, insisted. He said as casually he could. Their son, he would be about Dudley age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, and Mrs. Dursley stuffy. What's his name again? Howard, is not it? Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me. Oh yes, said Mr. Dursley, his heart sneaking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to the bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bedroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down the pivot drive as thought it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he did not think he would bear it. The Dursley got into the bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He could not see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned her over. It could not affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Pivot Drive. It did not so much as a quiver when a car door slammed in the next street, nor when two ovals swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the car moved at all. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching, appeared so suddenly and silently. You would have thought he would just poked out of the ground. The cat tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen in the Pivot Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and braid, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing a long robes and purple cloths which swept the ground and high-heeled buckle boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore did not seem to realize that he had just right in the street where everything from his name to his vote was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his clock looking for something, but he did not seem to realize he was being watched because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to assume him. He clucked and muttered, "I should have known." He had found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again, and the next lamp flickered into the darkness. 12 times he clicked that put out her, until the only lights left in the whole street were two tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eye of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even a beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they would not be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put outer back inside his cloak and sat down the street towards the number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He did not look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned to smile at the tapping, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at the rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings the cat had around its eye. She too was wearing a lock, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into the tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I never seen a cat sit so stiffly. You would be stiff if you would be sitting on a brick wall all day," said Professor McGonagall. "All day, when you could have been celebrating? It must have passed a dozen fairs and the parties on the way here." Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh yes, everyone's celebrating all right," she said impatiently. "You would think they would be a bit more careful, but no. Even the Muggles have noticed something going on. It was on their news." She jerked her head back at the dusty dark living room window. "I heard that flock of owls shooting a star. Well, they are not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something shooting stars down in the sky. I will be that the Douglas Diggles, he never had much sense." "You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We had a precocious little to celebrate for 11 years. We had a precious little to celebrate for 11 years. I know that," said Professor McGonagall irritably. "But there's no reason to lose our hat. People are being downright careless out on the street in the broad daylight, not even dressed in the Muggle clothes, swapping rumors." She threw a sharp sideways glance at the Dumbledore here as he thought of hoping he was going to tell her something, but he did not. So she went on. A fine thing it would be if on the day you know who seemed to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us all. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore? It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a sherbet lemon? A what? A sherbet lemon. They are kind of muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she did not think this was the moment for the sherbet lemon. As I say, even if you know who has gone, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you know who nonsense. For 11 years, I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking to sherbet lemon, seemed not to notice. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you know who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying a Voldemort name. I know you have not, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half accepted, half admiring. But you are different. Everyone knows you are the only one you know who all right. Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had a power I will never have, only because you are too well noble to use them. It's lucky. It's struck. I have not blushed so much since the Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new ear muffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, The owl are nothing to the rumor that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying about why he's disappeared? About what finally stopped him. It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss, the real reason she had been waiting on a cold hard wall all the day, for neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed a Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was a plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believing it until the Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another sherbet lemon and did not answer. What they are saying, she pressed on, is that the last night Voldemort turned up in the Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters, and the rumors that Lily and James Potter are that they are dead. Dumbledore bobbed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James. I can't believe it. I did not want to believe it. Oh, Albus. Dumbledore reacted out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They are saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he could not. He could not kill that little boy. No one know why or how, but they are saying that even he could not kill Harry Potter. Voldemort power somehow broke, and that's why he can't. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true. Flutter Professor McGonagall. After all he has done, all the people he's killed, he could not kill a little boy. It just astounding of all the things to stop him. But how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands but no numbers. Inches, little planet were moving around the edges. It must have made a sense of the Dumbledore throw because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid is late. Suppose it was he who told you I will be there, by the way. Yes, said Professor McGonagall. And I don't suppose you are going to tell me why you are here of all places. I will come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They are the only family he has left now. You can't mean the people who live here? Cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing the number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You could not find 2 people who are less like us. And they are God his son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up to the street, screaming for the sweets. Harry Potter come and live here is the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he is old. I will be writing them a letter. A letter, repeated Professor McGonagall, faintly sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people may never understand him. He will be a legend. I would not be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be a book written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very serious over the top of his half-moon glasses. It will be enough to turn any boy head. Famous before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he would not even remember. Can't you see how much better off he will be growing up away from all that until he is ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed, and then said, Yes, you are right, of course, but how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed at his clock suddenly as she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it. Hagrid bring him. You think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart is not in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grimly. But you can't pretend he is not careless. He does stand to what was that? A low mumbling sound broke the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street. for some sign of headlights. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up at the sky, and the huge motorbike fell out of the air, landed on the road in front of them. If the motorbike was huge, it was nothing to the man sitting astride it. He was almost twice as tall as normal men and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed and so wide. Long tangles of the bushy black hair beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of dustbin lids, and his feet in their leather boots were like a baby dolphin's. In his vast muscular arm he was holding a bundle of blankets. "Hagrid," said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. "At last, and where did you get the motorbike?" "Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir," said by a giant, climbing carefully off the motorbike as he spoke. Young Sirius Black leaned into me. "I've got him, sir." "No problem." "Were they?" "No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out all the right before the Muggles started around. He fell asleep as he was falling over the pistol." Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets inside. Just visible was a baby boy, fast asleep, under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead. They could see a curiously shaped cut like a bolt of lightning. "Is that where?" whispered Professor McGonagall. "Yes," said Dumbledore. "He will have that scar forever." "Could not you do something about it, Dumbledore?" "Even if I could, I would not. A scar can come in useful. I have one myself above my left knee, which is perfect back of London. Underground valve, give him a hair. Hagrid, we would better get this over with." Dumbledore took a Harry in his arm and turned towards the Dursley house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir?" asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy head over the Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly Hagrid let out howl like wounded dog. "Shh!" hissed Professor McGonagall. "You will be with the Muggle." "Sorry," sobbed Hagrid, taking out of a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. But I can't stand it. Lily and James dead and poor little Harry after a live with the Muggles. Yes, it's all very sad. But get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we will be found," Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid angrily on the arm as the Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He led Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from the Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. "Well," said Dumbledore finally, "that's that. We will have no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations." "Here," said Hogwarts in a very muffled voice. "Our best get this bike away," a keen-eyed Professor McGonagall, Professor Dumbledore, wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve. Hagrid swung himself on the motorbike and kicked at the engine into the light with a roar. It rose into the air and off into the night. "I shall see you soon, I accept." Professor McGonagall said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. Over the corner, he stopped and took out the silver pot-order. Clicking it once, and the 12 bars of the light disappeared back to their street lamp, so the Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange, and he could make out the tabby cat slinging around the corner at the other side of the street. He could just see the bundle of the blanket on the step of the number 4. "Good luck, Harry," he mumbled. He turned to his heel. With a swish of his cloak, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat hush of the Privet Drive, which lay silent, tidy, under the inky sky, the very last place you would accept astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blanket without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him. He slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by the Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottle, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He could not know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in the hushed voice, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived."